The moment Natalie Lawson stepped through the towering obsidian doors of the Pendragon estate, she knew her life would never be the same. She had been working double shifts at the university library for 3 years, scraping together tuition payments and living off instant ramen when the letter arrived on cream-colored paper that felt like silk between her fingers. An invitation to work as an archivist for a private collection, with a salary that made her gasp aloud in the empty break room. She had applied on a whim after seeing the obscure posting on an academic forum, never expecting a response. Now here she stood, 23 years old, clutching her worn leather messenger bag, staring up at a chandelier made entirely of crystal that caught the lamplight and threw rainbows across marble floors. "Miss Lawson." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, smooth as aged whiskey and cold as winter wind. "You're early." She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. He stood at the top of a curved staircase that belonged in a palace, not a mansion hidden in the hills outside the city. White hair fell past his shoulders, so pale it seemed to glow against the black of his tailored suit. His skin was porcelain, flawless, and when he descended the stairs with movements too fluid to be entirely human, Natalie felt her heart hammer against her ribs. "I apologize," she managed, hating how her voice wavered. "The bus came earlier than scheduled. I can wait outside if no need." He reached the bottom of the stairs and extended a hand. Long fingers, elegant and strong. "Quinlan Pendragon, welcome to my home." His hand was cold when she shook it, but his grip was gentle. His eyes were the color of fresh blood, impossible and hypnotic, and Natalie found herself unable to look away. She trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence without sounding insane. "A vampire, yes." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I assumed you knew." The position description was quite specific about the nature of the collection. Historical documents pertaining to vampire genealogy and territorial agreements dating back to the 14th century. Natalie's mind raced. She had thought it was metaphorical, Gothic aesthetics, rich people with too much money and too much time playing at darkness. But the way he moved, the way the shadows seemed to cling to him like loyal servants, the absolute wrongness of his beauty, it was real. All of it was real. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought it was themed." Quinlan tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "And now that you know the truth, will you run?" She should. Every instinct screamed at her to bolt for the door, to flee into the night and never look back. But her student loans wouldn't pay themselves, and her mother's medical bills kept piling up, and this job paid more in a month than she could make in a year anywhere else. "I need this position," Natalie said, lifting her chin. "And I'm very good at what I do. If you're willing to overlook my ignorance, I promise you won't regret hiring me." Something flickered in those crimson eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. "Then let me show you to the archives." The collection was breathtaking. 3 floors beneath the mansion, accessible only by an elevator that required both a keycard and Quinlan's palm print. The archive sprawled through climate-controlled rooms that smelled of old paper and leather. Documents in glass cases, books bound in materials Natalie didn't want to identify. Scrolls so ancient she was afraid to breathe near them. She turned in a slow circle, overwhelmed. "This is incredible." "It's also in chaos," Quinlan said dryly. The previous archivist was turned to ash 3 months ago. Unfortunate incident involving a sunrise and poor curtain placement. Since then, no one has maintained the cataloging system, and I have several treaties coming up for renewal that I cannot locate. Natalie moved to the nearest table, where papers were scattered in haphazard piles. Her fingers itched to organize them. "I can do this. It'll take time, but I can create a proper system." "You'll have all the time you need." Quinlan moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. "And should you require anything, food, equipment, additional lighting, you need only ask. This collection represents centuries of my family's history. I trust you'll treat it with appropriate care." "I will." She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated despite the predator standing inches away. "You have my word." The first 3 weeks passed in a blur of work that consumed her completely. Quinlan kept unusual hours, often appearing in the archives near midnight and staying until dawn threatened. He would sit in one of the leather chairs, reading correspondence written in languages Natalie couldn't identify, occasionally answering her questions about dating systems or territorial boundaries that no longer existed on modern maps. He was unfailingly polite, unexpectedly knowledgeable about archival best practices, and more dangerous than anything she'd ever encountered. She watched the way he moved, like liquid shadow, and listened to the absolute silence that surrounded him. No heartbeat, no breath unless he chose to speak. Sometimes she would look up from her work to find him watching her with those blood-red eyes, his expression unreadable. "Why hire a human?" she asked one night, carefully placing a 14th century treaty into an acid-free folder. "Surely there are vampires who could do this work." Quinlan set down the letter he'd been reading, written in what looked like Old French. "Vampire society is built on secrets, Miss Lawson. Everyone has an agenda, an alliance, a family connection that colors their judgment. Hiring someone from within my own kind means risking that they'll use what they learn here against me, or sell information to my enemies, or simply destroy evidence of agreements that no longer suit their purposes. And you trust me? A human you'd never met before? I trust that you have no connection to vampire politics, that you want to be paid and left alone to do your work, that your interests begin and end with proper documentation." He paused, his gaze intense. "And I trust my instincts, which tell me you're exactly what you appear to be. Honest, competent, desperately in need of the money I'm paying you." Natalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Is it that obvious? You've been wearing the same 3 outfits in rotation since you started. You bring your lunch in containers that have been washed so many times the plastic is cloudy. And I've seen the way you check your phone during breaks, always looking at the same banking app with an expression of profound stress." Quinlan's voice gentled slightly. "I'm not judging you, Miss Lawson. I'm simply observing that you need this position as much as I need your skills." She should have felt exposed, vulnerable. Instead, something about his matter-of-fact tone made her relax. "My mother has stage 3 breast cancer. The treatments aren't covered by her insurance, and I'm still paying off my undergraduate loans. So yes, I need this job desperately, but I promise you I would never compromise your collection or your trust, not for any amount of money. I believe you." Quinlan rose from his chair with that impossible grace. "It's nearly dawn. I must retire. You should go home and rest as well. You've been here 14 hours. Just let me finish this section, Miss Lawson." His voice carried an edge of command that made her look up automatically. "Go home. The documents will still be here tomorrow." She wanted to argue, but the weight of exhaustion hit her suddenly. "All right, I'll see you tonight then." "Tonight," he agreed, and disappeared toward the elevator with footsteps that made no sound at all. The invitation came on her 4th week. Heavy cardstock, embossed with a seal that showed a dragon wrapped around a crescent moon. Quinlan presented it to her himself, materializing at her work table so silently that she nearly knocked over her carefully organized stack of treaties. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't sound particularly apologetic. "I need you to accompany me to a gathering tomorrow evening." Natalie stared at the invitation, trying to parse the formal language. "This is a vampire court function?" "Yes. Several nobles from the surrounding territories will be attending. It's primarily political theater, but I need to bring someone with me, and I refuse to play the games expected of me by bringing another vampire as my companion. You want me to be your date." The words came out higher pitched than she intended. "I want you to be my guest." Quinlan corrected, though something flickered in his expression. "You'll be perfectly safe. No one would dare harm a human under my protection, and I'll ensure you're never alone with anyone who might seek to intimidate you. Consider it part of your employment. I'll pay you triple your usual rate for the evening." Natalie bit her lip, thinking of her mother's upcoming scan, the one that cost $3,000 out of pocket. "I don't have anything to wear to something like this." "That's been arranged." Quinlan gestured toward the elevator, where Natalie now noticed several garment bags hanging on a rolling rack. "I took the liberty of having some options prepared. If none suit you, tell me and I'll have others brought in." She should have been annoyed by his presumption. Instead, she felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. "You didn't have to do that. I'm asking you to enter a room full of immortal predators who view humans as little more than livestock. The least I can do is ensure you have appropriate armor. The dresses were beautiful. Deep jewel tones, elegant cuts, fabrics that felt like water under her fingers." Natalie chose a gown in midnight blue that made her dark hair and fair skin seem to glow, with a neckline that was modest but sophisticated. When she emerged from the small bathroom adjacent to the archives, Quinlan had gone very still. "Will this work?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes," his voice was rougher than usual. "That will work perfectly." The gathering was held in what Quinlan called the Court of Shadows, a sprawling underground complex built beneath an abandoned cathedral in the old part of the city. Natalie clung to Quinlan's arm as they descended stone steps that predated the Revolutionary War, trying not to think about how far underground they were going. The main hall was cathedral-like itself, all soaring arches and stained glass windows that depicted battles between creatures with fangs and wings. Chandeliers hung from chains as thick as her wrist, and the assembled vampires looked like something out of a Renaissance painting come to horrifying life. They were all white-haired and pale-skinned, dressed in combinations of modern and historical fashion that should have looked ridiculous, but instead seemed regal. They moved with Quinlan's same liquid grace, and when they turned to watch Natalie enter on his arm, their eyes gleamed in shades of red and amber and gold. "Quinlan Pendragon," a voice called out, smooth and mocking. "How unexpected to see you at a social gathering. I thought you preferred your dusty books to civilized company." The speaker was tall even among the vampires, with hair so white it seemed to absorb light. His face was beautiful in the way of classical statues, perfect and cold and utterly merciless. He wore a coat that belonged in the 18th century, all embroidered silk and silver buttons, and when he smiled, his fangs were very white. "Lord Valerian Ashford," Quinlan replied, his tone neutral. "I see you're still compensating for your inadequacies with excessive fashion." Several vampires nearby made sounds of amusement. Valerian's smile sharpened. "And you've brought a pet!" His gaze swept over Natalie with undisguised contempt. "How quaint!" Natalie felt Quinlan tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "I'm not a pet. I'm his archivist. An archivist." Valerian said the word like it was something foul. "How terribly modern of you, Quinlan. Hiring human help instead of relying on your own kind. Though I suppose given your family's diminished circumstances, you can't afford a proper vampire assistant." "My family's circumstances are none of your concern," Quinlan said softly, dangerously. "And you will not speak to Miss Lawson with disrespect again. Or what? You'll challenge me?" Valerian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You may be a Pendragon, but your line has been in decline for centuries. You hold your territory by tradition alone, not by power. Everyone here knows it." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Natalie could feel dozens of eyes on them, watching this exchange with the avid interest of predators scenting blood. Her hand tightened on Quinlan's arm. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private," a new voice suggested. This vampire was older than the others, she could tell somehow, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested an age beyond counting. He wore a simple black suit and carried himself with the assurance of someone who never needed to prove his power. "Lord Ashford, Lord Pendragon, the council chambers are available. An excellent idea, Archon Sorin," Quinlan said. He turned to Natalie. "Wait here. I'll return shortly. I'm coming with you," Natalie said immediately. "This is vampire business. I'm your guest." "You said I'd be under your protection and never left alone. Unless that was a lie?" Something fierce flashed in Quinlan's eyes, almost like pride. "Very well. Stay close to me." The council chambers were smaller than the main hall, circular, with a table made of black stone that gleamed like volcanic glass. Valerian threw himself into one of the high-backed chairs with theatrical disdain, while Archon Sorin took a seat with more dignity. Quinlan pulled out a chair for Natalie before taking his own. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Valerian said, leaning back and steepling his fingers. "Or rather, the human. Really, Quinlan, bringing her here, to a gathering of nobility? It's embarrassing. Why?" Natalie asked before she could stop herself. "Because I'm human? Because you're beneath us," Valerian said flatly. "This is a gathering of those who have ruled territories for centuries, who remember empires that turned to dust before your grandparents were born. You're a mayfly, here and gone in a blink. Why should we treat you as an equal?" "I never claimed to be your equal," Natalie replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "But I am owed basic respect as a guest and as a person. Or does immortality strip away basic decency?" Valerian's eyes flashed gold with anger. "You dare!" "She dares because she's under my protection," Quinlan interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And she's right. Whether you like it or not, Valerian, humans are not livestock. They're not toys, and they're certainly not inferior simply because their lives burn bright and brief instead of stretching on for centuries. If anything, that makes their courage more impressive, not less." "How touching," Valerian said with a sneer. "The Pendragon heir, defending his human pet. Tell me, have you grown so fond of her? Perhaps you've forgotten what you are, what she is, the natural order of things." "The natural order," Quinlan repeated softly, "is that I hold my territory by right of blood and power, that I have treaties with 12 neighboring lords, all of whom honor my family's ancient claims, and that you, Valerian, hold your position because your father was strong enough to take it, not because you've earned anything yourself. So perhaps we should speak less of what's natural and more of what's real." Archon Sorin made a sound that might have been approval. "Lord Pendragon raises a valid point. This gathering was meant to discuss the upcoming renegotiation of the Western Accords, not to debate the social standing of his employees. She's more than an employee. Valerian said, his voice dripping with insinuation. Isn't that right, Quinlan? You've been spending every night in those archives with her. Alone. I wonder what else you've been doing besides organizing dusty papers. Natalie felt her face burn. Beside her, Quinlan had gone very, very still in the way that reminded her of a snake coiling to strike. Choose your next words carefully, Quinlan said, each syllable precisely enunciated. Because what you're implying is a grave insult to Miss Lawson's honor, and I don't tolerate insults to those under my protection. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. Quinlan rose from his chair, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Frost spread across the black stone table in delicate patterns. If you speak of her that way again, I will challenge you, and we both know how that will end. Valerian stood as well, his hand going to something at his belt, a ceremonial dagger, Natalie realized, the kind she'd seen referenced in the dueling protocols outlined in some of the documents she'd been cataloging. You think you can defeat me? Your family may have been great once, but you're a scholar, not a warrior. I've killed 17 challengers. What have you done besides hide in your mansion with your books and your human? I've survived 374 years by knowing exactly when to strike, Quinlan replied. But if you'd like a demonstration. Enough. Archon Soren's voice cracked like a whip. Both of you sit. This posturing is beneath you, Lord Pendragon, and you know better, Lord Ashford. We have business to attend to. Slowly, Quinlan sank back into his chair. Valerian did the same, but his eyes never left Quinlan's face, burning with hatred. The meeting dragged on for hours. Natalie understood perhaps a quarter of what was discussed: territorial boundaries, feeding rights, human protection laws that apparently existed but were routinely ignored. Quinlan spoke with quiet authority, referencing treaties she'd helped him locate, citing precedents that went back 5 centuries. He was brilliant, she realized. Not just intelligent, but strategically minded, always 3 moves ahead of whoever he was debating. And every time Valerian or one of his allies made a cutting remark about Quinlan's pet human, Quinlan shut them down with precision and barely leashed fury. By the time they finally left the council chambers, Natalie's head was spinning. Quinlan guided her back through the main hall, where clusters of vampires watched them with undisguised curiosity. She heard whispers following in their wake. Is it true he threatened to duel Valerian over her? A human archivist. How odd. She's pretty enough, I suppose, for her kind. Beneath him, though. Everyone can see that. Natalie's chest tightened. She kept her head high, refused to let them see how their words cut. But by the time they reached Quinlan's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than her apartment building, her hands were shaking. I'm sorry, she said as Quinlan pulled away from the cathedral. I didn't mean to cause problems for you. You didn't cause anything. Quinlan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Valerian has been looking for an excuse to challenge my position for decades. Tonight was simply the latest attempt. But he's right, isn't he? About your family's circumstances? Quinlan was quiet for a long moment. My family ruled a vast territory once. From the mountains to the coast, all fell under Pendragon protection. But there was a war a century ago, internal conflict among the vampire houses. My grandfather chose the losing side. We survived, but our territory was reduced to a fraction of what it had been. Now we hold a single city and the surrounding hills, wealthy by human standards, impoverished by vampire nobility. I'm sorry, Natalie said softly. Don't be. We survived when others didn't, and I've worked for 3 centuries to rebuild what was lost. The archives you're organizing, they contain proof of alliances and treaties that could restore much of our former power. If I can prove the validity of certain historical claims before the High Council, I can petition for territorial restoration. Is that why you needed an archivist? For the evidence? Partially. But also because I'm tired of vampire games. Tired of everyone having an agenda. You're the first person in 200 years who's looked at me and seen someone to work with, rather than someone to manipulate or destroy. He glanced at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. You have no idea how rare that is. How valuable. Something warm unfurled in Natalie's chest, something dangerous and wonderful that she knew she should suppress. He was a vampire, immortal, impossibly beautiful and powerful. She was human, temporary, ordinary. This couldn't work. It couldn't be real. But the way he looked at her made her feel like she was the rarest treasure in all his carefully organized archives. The whispers started 2 days after the gathering. Natalie didn't hear them herself. She was human, confined to the archives and her small apartment, moving between the 2 worlds without touching the broader vampire society. But she saw the effect on Quinlan. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He spent longer hours in the archives, but seemed distracted, his attention drifting from the documents she presented. Twice she caught him staring at her with an expression that made her breath catch, something between longing and despair. "What's wrong?" she finally asked, setting down the treaty she'd been examining. "And don't say nothing. You've been different since the gathering." Quinlan closed his eyes. "The nobles are talking. About you. About us. What are they saying? That I've become infatuated with my human archivist. That I'm making a fool of myself. Lowering my status by associating so closely with someone of your station." He said the word with such distaste that Natalie knew it wasn't his opinion he was voicing. Valerian has been particularly vocal. "He's convinced several other lords that I'm unfit to hold my territory if I can't maintain appropriate boundaries with humans." Natalie's stomach sank. "Because of me. Because they're small-minded fools who measure worth by age and species rather than character." Quinlan opened his eyes, and they were burning, but they're also influential. And if enough of them petition the High Council to review my territorial claim, you could lose everything. Natalie stood up, backing away from the table. "Then I'll resign." "Immediately. You can hire a vampire archivist, someone appropriate." No, Quinlan was across the room in an instant, moving with that inhuman speed, his hands catching her shoulders. "I don't want someone appropriate. I want you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that went far beyond professional relationships. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Quinlan," she whispered. "I know," he said roughly. "I know it's impossible. I know that you're human and I'm not. That you'll age and die while I remain unchanged. That my world is dangerous and cruel and will never accept you. I know all of it. But Natalie, I cannot bear the thought of you leaving. These past weeks, working beside you, watching you bring order to chaos, listening to your laugh when you discover something particularly interesting in the documents, it's been the happiest I've been in centuries." "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I know I shouldn't. You're my employer. You're a vampire. This is insane. But when I'm with you, I feel seen in a way I've never experienced before. Like I matter. Like what I do matters. You do matter." Quinlan's hands slid from her shoulders to cradle her face, cold fingers impossibly gentle against her skin. "More than territories or treaties or the opinions of small-minded nobles. You matter, Natalie Lawson. To the work. To this place. To me." She should have been afraid. His eyes were crimson, his skin was cold as death, and she could see the sharp points of his fangs when he spoke. But all she felt was a fierce, consuming certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "What do we do?" she asked. "I don't know." Quinlan's thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I won't let them hurt you. Whatever happens, whatever they say, you're under my protection. Always." The summons came a week later. Heavy paper, sealed with black wax that showed the symbol of the High Council, a crown wrapped in thorns. Quinlan held it in his hands like something poisonous, his expression carefully blank. "What is it?" Natalie asked, looking up from the genealogy records she'd been cross-referencing. "A formal inquiry. The council has received petitions questioning my fitness to hold my territory. They're requiring me to appear before them to defend my claim." He set the letter down with precise care. "It's Valerian's doing. He's convinced enough nobles to sign the petition that the council has no choice but to investigate." "When?" 3 days. I'll need to bring documentation proof of my family's historical claim, evidence of proper territorial management, testimony from allied lords." Quinlan's jaw tightened, "And I'll likely face questions about my personal life, about you. Then tell them the truth, that I'm your archivist, that our relationship is professional. But it's not, is it?" Quinlan looked at her, his gaze intense. "Not anymore. Perhaps not ever, if I'm honest with myself." Natalie's hands trembled as she set down her pen. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you." The words were quiet but absolute. "I'm saying that you've become the center of my world in a way I didn't think possible anymore. And I'm saying that I won't lie about it, not even to save my territory. I won't dishonor what we have by pretending it's less than it is." Her breath caught. "You love me?" Desperately, completely, against all reason and sense. Quinlan moved around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his cold ones. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You're human, mortal, and I'm offering you nothing but danger and scandal. But Natalie, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel—" "I love you too," she interrupted, the words spilling out in a rush. "I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but I can't help it. You're brilliant and kind, and you see me as more than I've ever seen myself. I don't care that you're a vampire. I don't care about the politics or the danger. I just care about you." Quinlan's eyes closed, and for a moment he simply knelt there, holding her hands as if they were the only solid things in a shifting world. Then he looked up at her, and his expression was raw with emotion. "The council will use this against me, They'll say I've been compromised, that I've violated the unspoken rules of our society by forming an attachment to a human. I could lose everything. Then we'll figure something else out. Natalie said fiercely, "We'll find a way. There has to be precedent, some legal argument. There isn't. Not really. Vampires have taken human lovers before, certainly, but not openly, not with claims of genuine love and partnership. It's seen as weakness at best, perversion at worst." Quinlan's voice was bitter. "Our society is built on hierarchy and pride. Admitting that a human matters to me, that you've become essential to my existence, it goes against everything they believe." Natalie pulled her hands free and stood, pacing across the archive. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned over the past months, all the documents she'd cataloged, all the treaties and laws and historical precedents. "What about bonding?" she asked suddenly. Quinlan stiffened. "What? I've seen references to it in some of the older documents. A ritual that ties a human to a vampire permanently. It grants the human some of the vampire's longevity and protection, makes them legally recognized as part of the vampire's household." She turned to face him. "Could we do that?" "No." The word was flat, final. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "If it would legitimize our relationship in the eyes of the council, because bonding is not like marriage, Natalie. It's not a partnership between equals. It's a magical binding that makes you dependent on me for survival. You'd be tied to me forever, unable to leave even if you wanted to, your life force literally sustained by our connection. It's a form of ownership, and I won't do that to you. I won't take your freedom, no matter what it costs me." Natalie crossed her arms. "Shouldn't that be my choice? Not when you don't fully understand what you're agreeing to." Quinlan stood, his movements sharp with agitation. "I've seen bonds go wrong. Seen humans realize too late what they've traded away. You'd be giving up your autonomy, your future, any chance at a normal life." "I don't want a normal life," Natalie's voice cracked. "I want you. And if this bond is the only way the council will accept us, then I'm willing to do it. You're 23 years old. You have decades ahead of you, opportunities you haven't even imagined yet. I won't let you throw that away for me. You don't get to make that decision." She moved closer to him, tilting her chin up defiantly. "I'm an adult. I understand what I'm offering. And I'm choosing you, Quinlan. I'm choosing this life, this world, with all its complications and dangers. Because the alternative is safe. Normal existence without you in it sounds like a slow death." Quinlan stared at her, and she watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. Finally, he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest with desperate strength. "You're the bravest person I've ever known," he murmured into her hair, "and the most foolish, but I love you for both." "Is that a yes?" she asked against his shoulder. "It's an I'll think about it." He pulled back enough to look at her. "The council hearing is in 3 days. Let me try to defend my claim on its own merits first. If that fails, we'll discuss alternatives." Natalie nodded, even though frustration burned in her chest. She understood his hesitation, even admired his desire to protect her freedom. But she also knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she'd already made her choice. Whatever happened at the council hearing, she was staying with Quinlan. Even if the entire vampire world rejected them, the council chambers were older than the cathedral complex, deeper underground, carved from living rock that predated the city above. Quinlan had warned Natalie that the formal hearing would be different from the social gathering, more ritualistic, more overtly threatening. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The council itself consisted of 7 vampires so ancient they seemed carved from marble, seated on thrones of black stone that rose from the floor like stalagmites. They wore robes that mixed historical periods, medieval velvet, combined with Renaissance silk, combined with modern tailoring, and their eyes gleamed with colors Natalie had never seen in nature. Behind them, watching from tiered seating, sat at least 50 noble vampires, including Valerian Ashford, who watched Quinlan with undisguised anticipation. Quinlan stood in the center of the chamber, Natalie beside him, and faced his judges with a composure that she could only aspire to match. Lord Quinlan Pendragon, the center council member, intoned, her voice echoing off stone. "You stand before us to answer questions regarding your territorial claim and your fitness to rule. How do you answer the charges that you have compromised your position through inappropriate association with a human?" "I answer that the charges are based on prejudice rather than law," Quinlan replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I have broken no territorial agreements. I have maintained proper feeding protocols and ensured human safety within my domain. I have committed no crime. Yet you've brought a human as your companion to official functions," another council member said, leaning forward. "You've housed her in your personal residence, spent countless hours alone with her, and have been heard defending her honor with threats of violence against your fellow nobles. This suggests an attachment that clouds your judgment. It suggests that I treat all beings with basic respect, regardless of their species. Since when is that a crime? Since it interferes with your ability to govern effectively, Valerian called out from his seat. You threaten to duel me over a human's feelings. You've become emotionally compromised. How can the council trust you to make difficult decisions about human populations in your territory when you're in love with one of them? The words hung in the chamber. Natalie felt every eye turn to her, assessing, judging. She lifted her chin and met their stares without flinching. Yes, Quinlan said quietly, I'm in love with her. I won't pretend otherwise. Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. Even some of the council members looked taken aback by his blunt admission. You confess this openly? The center council member asked. You acknowledge that you've formed a romantic attachment to a human. I do. I love Natalie Lawson. She's intelligent, courageous, and honorable in ways that many immortals have forgotten. She's brought order to my archives and peace to my existence. And yes, I would defend her honor with my life if necessary. That's not a weakness. It's a strength. It's a liability, Valerian snapped. What happens when she grows old and dies? Will you be paralyzed by grief, unable to fulfill your duties? And what about her influence over you now? How do we know she's not manipulating you, using your attachment to gain power or information? That's ridiculous, Natalie said, her voice ringing out before she could stop herself. I'm an archivist, not a spy. And Quinlan doesn't need my influence. He's perfectly capable of making his own decisions. Silence, human, one of the council members commanded. You were not given permission to speak. Then I'm taking permission, Natalie shot back, too angry now to care about protocol. You want to know if I'm manipulating him? Fine. Let me tell you what I've actually done. I've cataloged 1,500 documents. I've created a database that cross-references treaties by date, territory, and signatory parties. I've found evidence of historical claims that could restore a third of the Pendragon territory if properly presented. That's my crime, doing my job well, and falling in love with a man who deserves better than this circus of prejudice. Dead silence filled the chamber. Then Valerian started laughing, a cold, mocking sound. Listen to her, speaking to the council as if she has any right or standing. This is exactly the problem, Quinlan. You've allowed this human to forget her place. She thinks she's your equal. She thinks she matters in our world. She does matter, Quinlan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. More than you, certainly. Because unlike you, Valerian, she's actually contributed something of value instead of simply existing on her family's ancient reputation. Valerian stood, his hand going to his ceremonial dagger. You go too far, Pendragon. Do I? Then challenge me. Here now, before the council. Let's settle this the old way, with blood and steel instead of politics and posturing. The council members stirred, exchanging glances. The center one raised her hand. Lord Pendragon, you realize what you're offering? A formal challenge before the council is binding. The winner claims the loser's territory and all their assets. The loser, if they survive, is exiled from vampire society permanently. I understand perfectly, Quinlan said. I'm tired of Valerian's interference. I'm tired of nobles who think age matters more than ability. So yes, I challenge him, and when I win, I'll expect this council to recognize both my territorial claim and my right to choose my own companions without further interference. Natalie grabbed his arm. Quinlan? Wait. It's all right, he said softly, covering her hand with his. This was always inevitable. Valerian won't stop until one of us is gone. Better to end it now. And when I kill you, Valerian asked, descending from his seat with predatory grace. What happens to your pet human then? You won't kill me, Quinlan replied with absolute certainty. Because for all your boasting, you've never fought anyone who had something real to fight for. You collect dueling victories like trophies. I'm fighting for my life, my home, and the woman I love. We're not the same. The council conferred briefly. Then the center member nodded. Very well. The challenge is accepted. The duel will take place immediately under traditional rules. First blood for honor. Surrender or death for conclusion. Are both parties agreed? Agreed? Quinlan and Valerian said in unison. The council chamber transformed. The stone floor split down the center. Sections sliding apart to reveal a circular arena beneath. All black sand and bare rock. Torches blazed to life around the perimeter, casting flickering shadows. The assembled nobles leaned forward, avid and eager. Natalie felt sick. She'd read about vampire duels in the archives, had cataloged the formal protocols and historical accounts. They were brutal affairs, showcasing the supernatural speed and strength that made vampires apexed predators. And Quinlan, for all his confidence, was a scholar. Valerian was a warrior. Don't, she whispered, still gripping his arm. Please, there has to be another way. There isn't. Quinlan turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face. Listen to me. If I lose, if the worst happens, go to Archon Soren. He's honorable, for a vampire. He'll ensure you're safely escorted from our world and compensated for your work. Promise me you'll do that. Promise me you won't try to stay or seek revenge or do anything foolish. I'm not promising that, Natalie said fiercely, tears burning her eyes. I'm promising that you're going to win, that we're going to walk out of here together, and then we're going to finish cataloging those archives and prove all of them wrong. Quinlan's expression softened. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and desperate, right there in front of the entire council and assembled nobility. Natalie heard scandalized gasps, outraged mutters, but she didn't care. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment, love and fear and absolute faith. When they finally broke apart, Quinlan rested his forehead against hers. Wait for me, he murmured. No matter what happens, wait for me. Then he was gone, descending into the arena with inhuman grace. Valerian entered from the opposite side, already removing his elaborate coat to reveal a vest of what looked like black leather armor underneath. He drew 2 daggers from his belt, each blade gleaming with an oily sheen that Natalie suspected was poison or something worse. I'm going to enjoy this, Valerian called across the arena. Centuries of Pendragon pride, ended by a lovesick fool. Quinlan didn't respond. He simply drew his own blade, a single sword that looked ancient, the metal dark and covered in etched runes, and settled into a fighting stance that seemed almost casual. The center council member raised her hand. Begin. Valerian moved like lightning, crossing the arena in a blur of speed. His daggers flashed toward Quinlan's throat, and Natalie screamed, but Quinlan was already gone, pivoting with that liquid grace, his sword coming up in an arc that forced Valerian to abort his attack and spin away. They circled each other, and Natalie realized she was watching something terrible and beautiful. This wasn't human combat, constrained by mortality and physics. This was what vampires truly were, creatures of nightmare speed and supernatural strength, moving too fast for normal eyes to fully track. Valerian attacked again, a flurry of strikes that should have been impossible to block. But Quinlan's sword moved in precise, economical arcs, turning aside each dagger thrust with minimal motion. He wasn't trying to overpower Valerian. He was conserving energy, reading his opponent's patterns. You're stalling, Valerian hissed. Too afraid to engage properly? I'm thinking, Quinlan replied calmly. Something you've never been good at. Valerian snarled and launched himself forward with redoubled fury. His daggers wove a pattern of death, coming from impossible angles, and this time one got through a shallow cut across Quinlan's shoulder that welled with blood so dark it was nearly black. First blood. But the duel didn't stop. Quinlan's expression hardened. He pressed forward, his sword moving in strikes that forced Valerian backward. The arena rang with the clash of metal, punctuated by the soft sounds of feet striking sand. Valerian was fast, but Quinlan was precise, each movement calculated and deliberate. Then Quinlan did something that made the assembled nobles gasp. He dropped his sword. Valerian lunged for the opening, daggers aimed at Quinlan's chest, and Quinlan simply wasn't there anymore. He'd moved with speed that defied even vampire physics. Closing inside Valerian's guard, one hand catching the warrior's wrist, while the other struck his throat with enough force to send him staggering backward. Before Valerian could recover, Quinlan had retrieved his sword and pressed the blade to his opponent's neck. Yield, Quinlan said quietly. Valerian's eyes blazed with hatred. Never. Then die. Quinlan's voice held no emotion. I'm giving you the choice, Valerian. Exile or death. Choose. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Valerian's shoulders slumped. I yield. The words echoed through the chamber. Quinlan stepped back, lowering his sword, and immediately turned to look up at where Natalie stood frozen at the arena's edge. Their eyes met, and relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly collapsed. He'd won. He was alive. They were going to be okay. But then Valerian moved. His hand flashed to a hidden sheath at his ankle, producing a third dagger, and he lunged at Quinlan's unprotected back with a roar of fury. Natalie screamed a warning. Quinlan spun, but too slowly, the blade arcing toward his heart, and suddenly Archon Soren was there, moving faster than thought, his hand catching Valerian's wrist in an iron grip. Treachery before the council, Soren said, his voice colder than Arctic wind. You've broken the oldest law of Valerian Ashford. The duel was over. He'd granted you mercy, and you responded with betrayal. Valerian struggled, but he might as well have been fighting a stone statue. Soren's ancient strength was absolute. The penalty, the center council member said, rising from her throne, is death. Soren didn't hesitate. His free hand struck once. faster than Natalie could track, and Valerian simply disintegrated, crumbling to ash that scattered across the black sand, leaving nothing but his clothing and weapons behind. Silence filled the chamber. Then, slowly, the council members stood as one. "Lord Quinlan Pendragon," the center member said, "you have proven your strength, your honor, and your fitness to rule. Your territorial claim is recognized without question. Furthermore, as victor of this challenge, you inherit Lord Ashford's territory and assets. You are now one of the most powerful lords in the regional council." Quinlan bowed, though Natalie could see tension in every line of his body. "I am honored by the council's recognition. As for the matter of your human companion," the council member's gaze shifted to Natalie. "You have proven that your attachment has not weakened you. If anything, it seems to have given you greater cause to fight. The council recognizes your right to choose your own companions, human or otherwise, without interference." Natalie's breath caught. It was over. They'd won, but Quinlan wasn't finished. He climbed out of the arena and crossed to where Natalie stood, then turned to face the council once more, pulling her to stand beside him. "With respect, council members, recognition is not enough. I want more than tolerance for my relationship with Natalie. I want her acknowledged as my equal partner. I want her granted the protections and status due to a vampire noble's chosen consort." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. The council members exchanged glances. "You ask for formal recognition of a human as noble consort?" the center member asked slowly. "That hasn't been done in centuries, not since the old treaties." "Then it's time to resurrect the tradition. Natalie has proven her value to me, to my work, and through her courage here today. She deserves to be treated with the respect and honor due to her station as my partner. This sets a dangerous precedent." Another council member said, "If we grant this, other vampires may seek to elevate their human companions. It could undermine centuries of established hierarchy. Or it could strengthen us," Quinlan countered. "Humans are not our enemies. They're not livestock. They're potential allies, partners, sources of perspectives we've long forgotten in our immortal stagnation. Natalie has helped me in 3 months more than vampire advisors did in 3 decades. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." The council conferred, their voices too low even for vampire hearing. Natalie held her breath, hardly daring to hope. Beside her, Quinlan's hand found hers, his cold fingers lacing with her warm ones. Finally, the center council member spoke. "Very well. The council recognizes Natalie Lawson as formal consort to Lord Quinlan Pendragon, with all the rights, protections, and status that entails." However, she raised a hand as Quinlan started to speak. "This recognition comes with a requirement. To truly cement her position and grant her longevity necessary for a vampire consort, she must undergo the bonding ritual." Natalie felt Quinlan stiffen. "That's not necessary." "It is," the council member interrupted. "If you want her recognized as your equal partner, she must be bound to you properly. Otherwise, she'll age and die while you remain unchanged, and the bond between you will be temporary by definition. The bonding ritual grants her a share of your immortality, enough that she'll age at a fraction of the normal human rate. It's the only way this can work long term." Quinlan turned to Natalie, conflict clear in his eyes. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "I want to," Natalie interrupted. "I already told you that. If this is what it takes to stay with you, to be recognized as your partner, then I'm willing, more than willing. Natalie, I choose you," she said firmly. "I choose this life. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions." For a long moment, Quinlan simply looked at her. Then slowly he nodded. "The bonding ritual, then. When?" "Now," the center council member said, "before witnesses, so that no one can question the legitimacy of your union." The ritual was older than Christianity, older than the Roman Empire, ancient when the pyramids were young. The council members descended from their thrones and formed a circle around Quinlan and Natalie in the center of the arena. One of them produced a ceremonial chalice, silver chased with gold, covered in runes that hurt Natalie's eyes to look at directly. "The bonding requires blood," the council member explained, her ancient eyes kind despite the gravity of the moment. "His blood drunk freely, your blood given willingly. And words spoken from the heart, pledging yourselves to one another. Once done, it cannot be undone. Your lives will be intertwined permanently. You'll feel his emotions as echoes of your own. His wounds will pain you. His death would likely kill you. This is not a small thing we ask of you, child." "I understand," Natalie said, proud that her voice didn't shake. Quinlan took the chalice, then drew his sword and made a shallow cut across his palm. Dark blood welled and dripped into the cup, and Natalie watched ancient magic swirl in the liquid like smoke. "Natalie Lawson," Quinlan said, his voice formal but his eyes warm, "I offer you my blood, my protection, and my eternal devotion. I pledge to honor you as my equal, to cherish you as my beloved, and to defend you with everything I am. Do you accept? I accept. Natalie took the chalice in trembling hands and raised it to her lips. The blood tasted like copper and lightning and something indefinable, and when she swallowed, fire raced through her veins. She gasped, nearly dropping the cup, but Quinlan steadied her hands with his. Now you, he murmured. Natalie held out her hand, and Quinlan drew the blade across her palm with exquisite gentleness. Her blood, bright red, startlingly vivid against his darkness, dripped into the remaining liquid in the chalice. Quinlan Pendragon, she said, looking into his crimson eyes, I offer you my trust, my heart, and my mortal life. I pledge to stand beside you as your partner, to love you without reservation, and to face whatever comes with courage. Do you accept? I accept. Quinlan raised the chalice and drank deeply, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment he swallowed, the world shifted. Natalie felt something fundamental change in her chest, as if a thread had been spun between her heart and Quinlan's. She could feel him suddenly, not his thoughts, but his emotions, his presence, solid and reassuring and absolutely certain. And when she looked down at their joined hands, she saw their blood mingling where their palms pressed together, glowing with soft golden light. The council members began to chant in a language Natalie didn't recognize, their voices harmonizing in complex patterns. The light around their hands grew brighter, spreading up their arms, wrapping them in luminescence that felt warm despite coming from a vampire's magic. Natalie's heart raced, but she felt no fear, only rightness. Only certainty. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the light flashed so bright she had to close her eyes. When she opened them again, the glow had faded, but something profound had changed. She felt stronger, more solid, as if she'd been upgraded from pencil sketch to oil painting, more real and vivid than before. It's done, the center council member said. Natalie Lawson is now Natalie Pendragon, bonded consort to Lord Quinlan Pendragon. She is recognized as vampire nobility, with all attendant rights and protections. Any who harm her answer to him and to this council. The assembled nobles, who had watched the entire ritual in stunned silence, began to murmur. Not all the sounds were approving, but no one dared speak openly against the council's decree. Quinlan pulled Natalie into his arms, holding her as if she were something infinitely precious. Are you all right? He whispered against her hair. How do you feel? Different, she said honestly. Stronger. And I can feel you. Your presence, your emotions. It's strange, but not unpleasant. I feel you too. Quinlan pulled back enough to look at her face. Your warmth, your courage, your absolute certainty. It's intoxicating. How long will I live now? Natalie asked, suddenly curious about the practical implications. The council member said I'd age at a fraction of the normal rate, roughly 1 year for every 10 that pass. One of the council members answered, having approached with silent vampire stealth. If Quinlan lives another 1,000 years, you'll age only 100 years during that time. It's not true immortality, but it's close enough that you'll have centuries together before age becomes a concern. Centuries. Natalie's mind reeled at the concept. But when she looked at Quinlan, at the man who'd challenged his entire society for her, who'd fought and won and then demanded she be treated as his equal, she felt only joy. That's more than enough time, she said softly. Quinlan's answering smile was radiant. More than I deserve, certainly. The council formally dismissed the assembly, though most nobles lingered to stare at the unprecedented couple. Archon Sorin approached, his ancient face creased in what might have been approval. Well played, Lord Pendragon, he said. You've accomplished in one evening what most vampires couldn't do in a century, secured your territory, eliminated your primary rival, and legitimized a relationship that by all rights should have destroyed you. I'm impressed. I had good motivation, Quinlan replied, his arm tightening around Natalie's waist. So I see. Sorin turned his ageless gaze to Natalie. And you, Lady Pendragon, you're aware that you've just become one of the most controversial figures in vampire society? There will be those who never accept you, who view your elevation as an affront to centuries of tradition. I'm aware, Natalie said, lifting her chin. But I didn't do this for their approval. I did it because I love Quinlan, and I'm willing to face whatever consequences come from that. Then you're braver than most vampires I know. Sorin inclined his head in a gesture of respect. I look forward to seeing what you make of your new position, Lady Pendragon. I suspect you'll surprise us all. The journey back to the Pendragon estate felt dreamlike. Natalie sat beside Quinlan in his car, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process everything that had happened. She was bonded now, married, essentially, by vampire law. Recognized as nobility, tied to Quinlan for centuries to come. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt peaceful, complete. Do you regret it? Quinlan asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Now that the adrenaline has faded, Now that the reality is settling in, not even slightly, Natalie laced her fingers with his. Do you? You've just tied yourself permanently to a human with no social standing, no vampire connections, nothing but her education and her feelings for you. I've tied myself to the most extraordinary person I've ever met, Quinlan corrected. Someone who faced down the Vampire Council without flinching. Someone who reorganized 3 centuries of chaos in 3 months. Someone who chose me despite every rational reason not to. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a cold kiss to her knuckles. I regret nothing except the years I spent alone before you walked into my life. Back at the estate, they descended to the archives not out of obligation but out of comfort. This was their space, where they'd fallen in love surrounded by centuries of history. Quinlan pulled Natalie into his arms properly, no longer constrained by propriety or fear of scandal. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I've loved you since the night you argued with Valerian, defending your own worth with such fierce pride, maybe even before that. You've become the center of my world, Natalie Pendragon. I love you too, she whispered back. Even when you're being overprotective and trying to make decisions for me. Quinlan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I'll try to improve on that front. You've made your capability abundantly clear. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, feeling the new bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. Then Natalie pulled back and looked around at the archives with a practical eye. We still have about 300 treaties to catalog, she pointed out. And now that you've inherited Valerian's territory, you'll probably have a whole new archive to integrate. Are you seriously thinking about work right now? Quinlan asked, amusement coloring his voice. I'm thinking about our future, Natalie corrected. About building something lasting. You said those archives contain proof of historical claims that could restore your family's territory. Well, now we have time to find every scrap of evidence, to build an unassailable case. And we have each other to help sort through it all. Quinlan's expression softened, practical even in the face of immortality. That's my Natalie. Your Natalie, she repeated, testing the words. I like the sound of that. Good, because you're mine now, by every law that matters. And I'm yours, completely and eternally. Quinlan cupped her face in his cold hands. Whatever comes, political challenges, social scandal, the simple passage of time will face it together. Together, Natalie agreed. He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, and Natalie felt the bond between them flare bright and warm. She could feel his love wrapping around her like a physical thing, fierce and protective, and absolutely certain. And she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would survive them. Because they had something most vampires had long forgotten: genuine partnership, built on respect and trust and love that transcended the boundaries of mortality. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment. Quinlan formally claimed Valerian's territory and assets, which included a secondary estate on the coast and an archive that made his own collection look modest. Natalie found herself suddenly responsible for organizing centuries of documents from 2 separate vampire houses, and she threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. But the social implications were more complicated. Other vampire nobles reached out, some with genuine congratulations, others with thinly veiled hostility. Natalie attended several more gatherings at Quinlan's side, and each time she faced whispers and stares from vampires who couldn't reconcile her human origins with her new noble status. At one particularly tense dinner, held at the estate of Lady Seraphine Darkwell, an ancient vampiress with ice-white hair and eyes like yellow diamonds, the hostess made her opinions clear. Lady Pendragon, she said, the title dripping with sarcasm. How quaint that you've joined our ranks. Tell me, do you find it difficult, navigating society with such limited experience? After all, most of us here have centuries of practice with court etiquette and political maneuvering. Natalie set down her wine glass. She still needed to eat and drink like a human, though less frequently than before, and met Lady Seraphine's gaze steadily. I find it different, certainly, but not impossible. And I'd argue that bringing a fresh perspective to centuries of tradition isn't necessarily a bad thing. A fresh perspective, Lady Seraphine repeated mockingly. Is that what we're calling human naivety these days? I'd call it the ability to see patterns that those too close to tradition might miss, Natalie replied calmly. For example, I've been reviewing the territorial agreements from the past 5 centuries. Did you know that there are at least 12 contradictory claims currently in effect? Treaties that grant the same land to multiple houses because no one bothered to cross-reference properly? A fresh perspective might suggest that consolidating and clarifying those agreements would prevent future conflicts. Lady Seraphine's eyes narrowed. You've been studying the agreements? That's my job, and I'm good at it. Natalie smiled pleasantly. Perhaps if you'd like help reviewing your own territorial claims, I could make time in my schedule. I'm told my organizational skills are quite exceptional, even by vampire standards. Several nobles at the table made sounds of amusement. Lady Seraphine's expression went cold, but she inclined her head in a gesture that might have been respect. Perhaps I misjudged you, Lady Pendragon. It seems there's more to you than your human origins suggest. There's more to all humans than vampires generally acknowledge, Natalie said. We just rarely get the chance to prove it. Later, as Quinlan drove them home, he was grinning. You're going to revolutionize vampire society, aren't you? I'm going to organize it, at least, Natalie replied. Someone needs to. Half your legal system is held together with tradition and assumptions, rather than actual documented agreements. It's a miracle you haven't had more territorial disputes. We've had plenty. We just settle them with duels rather than paperwork. Well, maybe it's time for that to change. Natalie looked out the window at the city lights, thinking about the future stretching ahead of them. Centuries of time to make a difference, to bridge the gap between human and vampire society, to prove that the two species could coexist as equals rather than predators and prey. It was daunting. It was exciting. And she was ready for all of it, because she wouldn't be facing it alone. The breakthrough came 6 months after the bonding. Natalie was deep in Valerian's archives, working through a collection of documents dating back to the 13th century, when she founded a treaty signed by representatives of 12 major vampire houses, including the Pendragons, that outlined territorial boundaries for the entire eastern seaboard. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding, then raced upstairs to find Quinlan. He was in his study, reviewing petitions from vampires within his expanded territory, and looked up in surprise when she burst through the door. I found it, she gasped, waving the carefully preserved document. The original Eastern Accord, the one everyone thought was lost in the War of Houses. Quinlan was beside her in an instant, taking the treaty with reverent hands. His eyes scanned the text, widening with each paragraph. Natalie, do you understand what this means? This treaty grants my family rights to territories that were supposedly ceded a century ago. If this is legitimate, it is. I've verified the seals, the signatures, the dating protocols. This is the original accord, and according to its terms, the Pendragons never actually lost their full territory. Other houses simply moved in when they thought the documentation was gone. Quinlan looked up from the treaty, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce joy. You've just restored my family's legacy. With this, I can petition the High Council for Territorial Restoration. We'll be one of the most powerful houses on the eastern seaboard again. We'll be powerful, Natalie corrected, moving into his arms. Not just you. We're partners, remember? How could I forget? Quinlan kissed her forehead, then her lips, the treaty still clutched in one hand. You've given me everything, Natalie. Love, purpose, hope, and now this. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. We're building this together. Natalie smiled up at him. Besides, you gave me everything too. A life beyond my wildest dreams. A love I never thought possible. And the chance to make a real difference in the world. I'd say we're even. The petition to the High Council took 3 months to prepare. Natalie compiled every piece of supporting evidence, cross-referenced historical accounts, and built a case so comprehensive that even the most skeptical council member would have difficulty refuting it. Quinlan presented their findings at a formal session, with Natalie standing beside him as his recognized consort and co-petitioner. The council reviewed the evidence, consulted their own archives, and after 2 weeks of deliberation, they issued their ruling. The Eastern Accord was legitimate. The Pendragon territorial claims were valid. Quinlan's territory was officially expanded to include all the lands outlined in the original treaty, nearly a third of the eastern seaboard, with 6 major cities and countless smaller settlements. Overnight, the Pendragons went from minor nobility, clinging to past glory, to one of the most powerful vampire houses in North America. The formal ceremony recognizing the territorial restoration was held in the council chambers, with representatives from every major vampire house in attendance. Quinlan stood before the assembled nobles in formal court, attire a long coat of deep burgundy with silver embroidery that marked him as territorial lord, his white hair pulled back to show the ancient Pendragon seal etched in silver at his temples. Beside him, Natalie wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed to capture starlight, her own hair styled in an elegant updo that made her look every inch the vampire nobility she'd become. The bond mark on her wrist, a delicate pattern of silver that had appeared after the bonding ritual, was clearly visible, announcing her status to anyone who looked. Lord Quinlan Pendragon, the center council member intoned. Approach and receive the sigil of your restored house." Quinlan moved forward with that liquid grace, and Natalie followed, their hands linked. The council member held out a silver circlet, not quite a crown, but close etched with the Pendragon dragon and crescent moon seal. "This sigil represents your family's ancient right and your house's restored power. Wear it with honor, rule your territories with wisdom, and remember that great power demands great responsibility." The council member placed the circlet on Quinlan's head, and the assembled nobles rose as one, acknowledging his new status. Then, in a move that made several vampires gasp, Quinlan removed the circlet and turned to Natalie. "I don't rule alone," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Lady Natalie Pendragon is my equal partner in all things. She found the evidence that restored our house. She built the case that proved our claim. And she will share in the governance of our territories, with full authority to act in my name." He placed the circlet on Natalie's head, and for a moment the chamber was utterly silent. Then, slowly, Archon Sorin began to clap. The sound echoed off stone walls, and one by one, other nobles joined in. Not all of them, some sat with arms crossed and expressions of disapproval, but enough that the applause filled the space. Natalie's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This was what they'd fought for. Not just acceptance, but recognition. Not just tolerance, but respect. She'd started as a human archivist desperate for rent money, and now she stood as co-ruler of a vampire territory, acknowledged by the highest powers in immortal society. When the ceremony ended and they returned to their estate, Quinlan swept Natalie into his arms and spun her in a circle, both of them laughing with pure joy. "We did it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "Against all odds, despite every obstacle, we built something lasting. We built a partnership," Natalie corrected. "And we're going to keep building it, one day at a time, for the next few centuries." "Centuries," Quinlan repeated, wonder in his voice. "I have centuries to love you, to work beside you, to watch you change the world. We'll change it together," Natalie said firmly. "That's the whole point. Neither of us alone, but both of us as partners, as equals, as what we were always meant to be." Quinlan pulled the circlet from her hair and set it aside, then cradled her face in his hands. "I love you, Natalie Pendragon, more than territory, more than power, more than my own immortal existence. You are my anchor, my compass, and my home." "I love you too," Natalie whispered, "always and absolutely." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she felt their bond flare bright between them. The connection that tied their lives together, that let her feel his devotion as certainly as her own heartbeat, that promised they would never face the world alone again. In the years that followed, the Pendragons became known throughout vampire society for their unconventional approach to governance. Natalie established programs to protect humans within their territories, creating laws that punished vampires who treated mortals as mere food sources. She opened the archives to researchers from other houses, promoting knowledge sharing and transparency. She even began training other humans who showed interest in vampire history, creating a new generation of mortal scholars who could bridge the gap between species. Some vampires called it revolutionary, others called it dangerous, but no one could deny its effectiveness. The Pendragon territories prospered, attracting both vampires and humans who wanted to live in a place where both species were treated with dignity. Quinlan supported every initiative, proud of the woman who'd transformed not just his life but his entire society. Together they hosted gatherings that mixed vampire nobility with human academics, creating dialogue that hadn't existed in centuries. They mediated disputes between houses using documented precedent rather than duels. They proved, day by day and year by year, that the old ways could evolve without losing their essential meaning. On their 10th anniversary, marked by vampire custom, from the night of their bonding, they stood together on the balcony of their restored family castle, looking out over territories that stretched to the horizon. The castle had been reclaimed along with the land, a Gothic masterpiece of stone and stained glass that predated the founding of America. They'd spent years restoring it, and now it stood as a symbol of everything they'd built together. "Do you ever miss it?" Quinlan asked, his arm around Natalie's waist. "Your human life? The simplicity of it?" Natalie considered the question seriously. She'd aged barely a year in the decade since their bonding, while her former classmates had moved on to marriages and careers and children. Her mother had passed peacefully 5 years ago, her medical bills paid in full, finally free from pain. The life she might have lived seemed distant now, like something from a dream. "I miss my mother," she said honestly. "I wish she could have seen all of this, known that I found happiness, but the life itself? No, I don't miss struggling to pay rent or working 3 jobs or feeling like I'd never be more than ordinary. You gave me the chance to be extraordinary, to matter, to make a difference that will last centuries. You always mattered, Quinlan said softly. I just gave you a stage large enough to show the world what I already knew. Natalie leaned into his cold embrace, feeling his presence through their bond like a steady flame. What about you? Do you ever regret binding yourself to someone who's still mortal? Who'll eventually age while you stay the same? Never. The word was absolute. You gave me 300 years of existence purpose. You reminded me what it means to truly live rather than simply exist. And when the day comes that age finally touches you, I'll love every silver hair and every laugh line because they'll be proof of a life fully lived. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their territories. Natalie was one of the few humans who'd seen a vampire watch the sunset without fear. Quinlan was old enough and powerful enough that twilight didn't threaten him, though full noon sun would still be deadly. She treasured these moments when day met night, and they existed in the space between, neither fully human nor fully vampire, but something new. We should go in, Quinlan said eventually. We're hosting the regional lords tonight. And you know how Seraphine gets if we're not there to greet her personally. She's warmed up to me considerably, Natalie said with amusement. Ever since I found that treaty proving her territorial rights to the coastal properties. Now she thinks I'm surprisingly competent for a former human. High praise from Seraphine. Quinlan pressed a kiss to her temple. Come on, let's go be lords of the realm together. The gathering that night was lively, full of political maneuvering and social intrigue that Natalie had learned to navigate with skill. She moved through the crowd with confidence, discussing archival techniques with Lord Theron of the Northern Territories, debating feeding ethics with Lady Morgana of the Mountain Houses, and even sharing a surprisingly pleasant conversation with Lady Seraphine about the difficulties of maintaining historical documents in humid climates. She felt Quinlan's attention on her throughout the evening, a warm presence through their bond, even when they were on opposite sides of the room. Every time their eyes met across the crowd, she felt his love and pride wash over her, and she sent the same feelings back to him. This was their life now. Partners in every sense, ruling together, building together, loving each other with an intensity that hadn't diminished in a decade, and showed no signs of fading even with centuries ahead of them. Near midnight, Quinlan found her on one of the castle's many balconies, taking a moment of quiet away from the party. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Happy anniversary, he murmured. Happy anniversary, she replied, lacing her fingers with his where they rested on her stomach. 10 years down, only several centuries to go. I can't wait, Quinlan said, and she felt the absolute truth of it through their bond. Every year with you is better than the last. Every day I discover some new reason to love you. You're my greatest adventure, Natalie Pendragon. She turned in his arms to face him. This impossible man who'd challenged his world for her, who'd crowned her before those who said she was beneath him, who'd made her his equal in every way that mattered. And you're mine, she said. My vampire king, my partner, my love. He kissed her under the stars, surrounded by the territories they ruled and the life they'd built, and Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. She'd traded ordinary mortality for extraordinary immortality, loneliness for partnership, obscurity for purpose, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat because some loves were worth defying the entire world for. Some loves were worth centuries. Some loves were worth everything. Theirs was all of that and more. The jealous nobles had whispered she was beneath him, unworthy of his attention, undeserving of his name. So Quinlan Pendragon had crowned her before them all, made her his equal, and dared anyone to question her worth again. And together, they'd proved that love transcended mortality, that partnership could bridge impossible divides, and that sometimes the greatest power came not from ancient bloodlines or immortal strength, but from two people who chose each other against all odds and refused to let go. Their story was just beginning, and they had centuries to write it together, and it would be magnificent.